Like any other collage, I often start with junk mail or magazines or paper that I find. I hunt through a magazine, I find different textures and colors that I like that might be interesting later. I'll decide when I'm making my collage which ones I'm ultimately going to use. For Cubomania, I'm going to use a ruler and measure out 1-inch squares. So I'm going to start by setting the ruler up, looking for the 0 of the ruler and lining it up with the 0 of the paper, that very edge there. I'm going to mark off 1-inch increments across. I'm going to do that twice. So lining it up, I'm going to mark at the 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch marks. I think I even have room for 7. I'm going to make a nice pencil mark. And then I'm going to move the ruler down and I'm going to do the exact same thing a second time. Now that I have my series of marks, I'm going to rotate my paper 90 degrees and I'm going to use those 2 marks that I just measured to draw a line. I'm carefully lining up the ruler so that it's touching both points. And then I'm going to, once I know the ruler is on one point and the other point, I'm going to hold the ruler down with one hand and draw a line across. That would ended up being a little bit weird because the image was so dark. I just realized it would probably be easier to do it on the lighter side. So I'm going to keep the paper turned 90 degrees and I'm going to do my marks in the opposite direction. So before I did it across the page, now I'm doing it down the page. And again, I'm lining up the edge of the paper with an inch mark so that I know that I have my 7-inch grid. I'm going to rotate my paper 90 degrees just like I did on the last side, and this time my lines are going to be going across the paper. On the other side, they're going down. Now I'm going to go back to the first side and I'm going to cut across the lines and I'm going to cut this into strips. Now that my paper is cut into strips in one direction, I can work the other direction. Remember, I decided to do it on the other side only because it was easier to see my lines. So here I am just cutting those strips into squares. Now that I've got my different squares cut from all the colors I want to use, I'm going to go back to my trusty cereal box and I'm going to cut out a flat sheet. I've done a lot of collages before and I have found that when I work from the edge in a grid, I tend to get everything ends up looking lopsided by the time it gets to the end. So what I like to do is start in the center. So I'm going to use the same technique that I did before. I'm finding the halfway point of the page and making 2 marks. And then I'm going to go across those 2 marks like a ladder. I'm going to do the same thing here. I see it's 7.5, so I'm going to go to 3.75 to find my halfway point of this page. I'm going to mark it twice, and I'm going to turn it and create a cross in the center, and I'm going to be working with my collage starting in the center. So the center will be very tight, and as it works outwards, if it gets a little bit loose, I won't be that worried about it because the center is going to be very neat. I'm going to start by laying out some squares just to see which ones I think will look good in which place before I start gluing. So I think I'm pretty happy with the beginning of this layout. So I'm going to move some of these squares out of the way, try to keep them in next to each other so that I don't have to do the work of rearranging them. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to work on just a few squares at a time. I'm going to start again in the center, making sure the center is perfect. As I work, I'm brushing each square with glue. I am laying it, making sure I'm getting all the way to the edges, and I am laying them in the place that I want them to be, smoothing out each one. If I find that I misplace one, I try to pull it off and put it back in the right place. Again, the power of this gridded look is that the lines are really straight, so I'm trying my best to maintain that. One of my favorite methods of gluing is using a scratch piece of paper and spreading it on the paper instead of getting my fingers all gluey. You will find a technique that works best for you. I'm just wrapping up. I'm making a 6x6 grid here, and I'm wrapping up and including a little bit of text in my final squares just for visual interest. And I am done with my collage.